Well, I'm here with Leo Briceno, and we are going to talk about Jeffrey Epstein, which is not really the thing that everybody wants to think about all the time, because it feels like a very dark story and something that has a lot of very negative implications, has already had a lot of negative implications on our political order. But if the rumors of the story are true, it seems like this story of Jeffrey Epstein could be one of the biggest stories in American history. I think it will go down as one of the biggest stories in American history. And so my thought is, look, I'm 26. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't have a bunch of context for the Epstein story. My friends and I talk about it. There's all these conspiracy theories, but I think what I wanted to do in this podcast is basically just start from the beginning, talk about how this whole thing started, who Jeffrey Epstein is, and where we're at right now, because it's been a decade, I think, since he's been arrested, maybe a little less than a decade. So since he was arrested, and then he committed suicide, whatever he did, however he died, and we'll probably talk about that. But Leo, real quick, before we even get into any of this, can you just tell the people a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do?
Sure. My name is Leo Briceno. I am a congressional reporter for World Magazine. World Magazine is a Christian publication that largely just says, hey, we are here for Christian readers. We assume a biblical worldview. That's how we interpret the world. What the Bible calls good, we're going to call good. What the Bible calls evil, we're going to call evil. But by and large, we're just reporting the news. In my line of work, you can catch me most days in the U.S. House of Representatives. I cover basically whatever it is that lawmakers on the Hill are talking about, whether that's the recently passed Big Beautiful Bill or whether that's something as salacious and as tantalizing as Epstein. And so it really does cover the gamut. That's a little bit about me and kind of what I do.
Yeah. So you've looked into this. You've reported on Epstein several times. You've followed the story closer than I have. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's start with who actually is Jeffrey Epstein, and then we'll get into how did this whole debacle start. But start with who he is.
So Jeffrey Epstein is a extremely well-connected financer. Prior to 2007, prior to 2008, he is known for having this very extravagant social circle that includes family members of the English royal family. It includes powerful politicians, including Donald Trump, including Bill Clinton, including some other figures. And so he's really renowned for being this extremely well-connected finance guy until 2007, 2008, when he gets in trouble with the Florida state for some, I think it was sexual trafficking charges, I think was kind of what they initially brought. I don't recall if there was underage attached to that at the time, but basically at that time, he took a plea deal. And I think he basically got a slap on the wrist for allegations that turned a lot of people away, that were kind of a red flag about maybe his character. But he stayed on the scene as being again, this well-connected guy that liked to live this extravagant lifestyle. He had a house in New York. He had an island. And so he had this kind of bigger than life persona. Then ultimately that all came crashing down. We started to face federal prosecution, and he was ultimately arrested in 2019. But before they got to trial, before they could really weigh whether or not this ring of sex trafficking that Epstein was allegedly running, how large it was, who was involved, who were the victims, a lot of the real concrete questions that were tied to it. Before any of that could be determined, Epstein is found dead in his cell. And so that's really the point at which I personally think this story stops being the one man, I don't want to say tragedy. Maybe it's a horror story. The one man horror story that is Jeffrey Epstein and kind of the conduct that he was displaying, and starts to turn into questions about, well, how transparent is our government when it comes to prosecuting even some of the most heinous behavior, when it happens to be connected with maybe some members that, well, we wouldn't like to see them in the same frame. And so after 2019, there's just general speculation about whether or not Epstein had actually died of suicide, as the FBI recently said, yeah, this is how it went down, or whether there was some foul play involved, whether or not there was someone who entered a cell who maybe used force to end his life. And so that's kind of where this story really becomes a question of public trust in government, becomes a story of, again, whether or not the government is really serious about pursuing and prosecuting even the most serious criminals, the most disgusting criminals, when it could be embarrassing for them. And really it takes on, again, a kind of bigger than life sort of element to it. And now fast forward all the way to 2025, and we're still talking about this guy because now there's an expectation, largely from the Republican base that put Donald Trump back in office, to be forthcoming on not just things like Jeffrey Epstein, but on things like UAPs, right, on the JFK assassination, on so many different things that he has basically said, look, I'm going to be the anti-establishment president that finally puts to bed so many of these things that the government has been hiding under the table. I'm going to be the guy that prioritizes putting out all these government secrets. And when it comes to Epstein, that just hasn't happened yet, or at least not to the satisfaction that a lot of that base really wants to see. And so this guy who died in, 2019, has continued to dominate the news in recent weeks because a lot of these voters really, really have high expectations for a degree of transparency we just haven't seen yet.
So what was the nature of the sex trafficking thing he had going on? Obviously, everybody knows about Epstein Island, and there's, all this speculation about who went to Epstein Island. The Clintons, you got pictures with Trump and Epstein and all these things, and all these people who are very famous, Tom Hanks, like different actors in Hollywood and different politicians. And we know a lot of who he was associated with, but what was the actual nature, or has all of that been like actually proven that there was a sex trafficking thing going on Epstein Island? Is that all settled? That actually happened? That's proved or objective truth?
Well, we know for a fact that the sex trafficking did happen because of Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction. So that's a great question, though, because a lot of the concrete meat on the bone of what did Epstein actually do is still under court sealed documents, right? That's kind of one of the efforts of the administration currently under Pam Bondi to try to get those documents unsealed, the grand jury testimony. So usually you'd have a grand jury that decides, is there enough evidence to actually pursue a criminal prosecution against this guy? Yes. Okay, let's go ahead and proceed with the prosecution. That's kind of where the process stopped. So you have this grand jury testimony that we have under seal that, some judges are saying, we can't release that because there are victims at play. There's real concerns about privacy and protecting innocent individuals involved. But that's where you would get kind of the real meat and potatoes of how many people were trafficked. I don't know that it answered necessarily who came to the island, but at the very least, it would answer the question of how long was this guy doing this? Yeah. Who all came, who all was victimized in this process? Maybe how many, what was the scope of Epstein's, I don't know, financial records tied to this sort of thing? If he ever elicited, payment for these kinds of services. Right. We know that it involved, again, because of Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction, underage girls under the age of 14. And so there are bits and pieces of the puzzle that we know, but the full scope of the details of what happened, those are still a mystery to the public. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause that was the thing that I remember Trump talking about. He's like, I'm going to release all this. We're going to know exactly what happened. And then even when was this? This must've been obviously within the last year. Elon Musk went on Rogan, and I can't remember, maybe this was like in February or March, and Trump had won, and he's talking about Doge. And what he's, willing to expose or not expose, and how he's had threats on his life and things like that. And Elon made it clear that, like, hey man, there's things that I'm not even going to talk about. There's things that I'm not even going to disclose to people, because if I even mention that, they're going to kill me. Whoever they are, they're going to kill me. I'm not even going to mention that. And I don't know if it was directly related to Epstein or anything like that, but it does seem like there's this deep well of secrets in the government that people are afraid of actually exposing, because there seems to be some other entity at play. And I don't want to get conspiratorial about well, I guess I do. There's probably something else at play. And you got the richest man in the world not willing to even talk about certain financial records and things like that, and government waste and spending. And then you get to the Epstein issue, and Pam Bondi says, the files are on my desk. We're going to release this to everybody just in 10 minutes. We'll see. And then nothing happens. And then the next I hear from the Trump administration, Trump is sort of like, Epstein, that guy, nobody cares about him anymore. And then everybody's like, we still care about him. Can you tell us what's going on? So where exactly where are we at right now with the Epstein case?
Yeah, so I think what we're still waiting on, I think, to see how this court battle plays out, right? I think basically the end of what you just described, Trump eventually said, "Okay, fine, right? I will direct my attorney general to go, and try to get these documents unsealed, to try to get some answers." And that came off of the heels of a very unflattering Wall Street Journal article that basically reported that Trump and Epstein had had a much closer personal relationship than maybe had been previously reported. That had, and the basis for that was this letter that Trump had allegedly written to Epstein. I think the word that kept getting thrown around online was bawdy or something like that. It was just a very sexually charged letter that didn't frame Trump in any kind of favorable lighting. And so at that point, basically Trump realized the political pressure is such that I have to move on this, or it's just going to look like I'm, protecting some sort of secret at play. Right. And so I think that there's still this ongoing battle between the Florida District Court and the administration, and what can be released and what can't be. Two things on that. One, I'll say that there are a lot of Republicans that are skeptical about whether or not, even if the administration gets a hold of those documents, whether or not they'd be transparent enough to just release them in their totality. I don't recall. I think it was Jamie Raskin, who is the ranking member on the Oversight Committee in the House of Representatives, basically said, yeah, is it going to be up to Pam Bondi to say what's relevant, what's not in that trove of documents? Because imagine that the administration ends up getting those things unsealed. Yes. Well, does it have to go through the administration first before they release them? Or, how does that work? So he had a lot of questions about, even if they do get those documents unsealed, it's not really necessarily indicative that the administration will be forthcoming with whatever the information is there. There are still, if the administration is ultimately the deciding party about what gets made public and what's not, he's very skeptical the administration would actually release everything they know on that front. And secondly, I will say that there is another effort in the House of Representatives that is spearheaded by lawmakers like Representative Thomas Massey of Kentucky, who has put in a discharge petition that would basically compel the administration legally to release whatever documentation it already has. And so those are kind of the two fronts where the process is now. Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I didn't even know it could do that.
I was just gesticulating too much with my hands.
That's funny. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So those are the two fronts that you have now. You got this court tension between the administration and the district court in Florida, and then you have this effort even inside of Congress to compel the administration to release already whatever's on the books. And so, yeah, that's kind of where the situation stands now. It'll be interesting to see whether or not members of Congress rally behind that. It's called a discharge petition in the House to try to get that passed. Because if Republicans really do rally around that, that'll be indicative that this isn't going anytime soon. Yeah. And even within Republican lawmakers, even within that base, that there's a high degree of expectation that the government or the administration produce something on this.
Is it bipartisan in any way, shape, or form? I mean, I remember, when Trump kind of was like, well, we don't care about Epstein anymore. Then the Democrats started being like, hey, we should put this out. So it does feel like it's kind of like a ping pong thing where it's like to whichever party it's the most useful at the time, they'll use it. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people standing in principle. I think Thomas Massie probably just wants these documents out there for everybody to see. And then we get into a question of like, is that actually good for everybody? Would that upend the entire political order? All those sorts of questions. But is it bipartisan, or do both sides of the aisle want to see this?
My understanding is that it is. Yeah, the last time that lawmakers were in up here, because they're out right now for the August recess, but literally on the last day they were up here, I was there on the steps of the Capitol with both Thomas Massie and Raskin, who were just having this conversation between themselves about Raskin saying, hey, I really admire this push that you're doing, that you're willing to go against the administration in order to get the job done. And Massie basically asking, are you going to sign on to this? And Raskin saying, yes, I will. And so although the signatures haven't been made public, I don't think, on that discharge petition, it sounds like, if the ranking member on a committee is willing to get behind a Republican effort, I guarantee you there are going to be other Democrats that are willing to sign on, especially given the political climate, that, there is something to be gained for Democrats to sign on to this. And so I definitely get the sense that there are enough Democrats and enough Republicans where they really could get to the 218 threshold to push this thing onto the floor and to at least have a vote on it.
So what happened? Okay, so what happens if everybody agrees we got to get these documents out? All of them, if they get to the administration, we got to release them to the people. Okay, we release them. The worst case scenario is true. Like the past 4 presidents are sex offenders. They were at Epstein Island. Like, I don't know if you have any answers to this question. It's sort of a forward-looking question, and we don't know if this is true. But like, what does that mean for the political order? What would that mean legally? What would happen? It's like if I find out that Trump. And let's say, Trump, Biden, Obama, whatever, maybe a Bush, maybe the Clintons were at Epstein Island doing horrific things. What does that mean? Answer that question there.
Oh, man. Jeez. Well, I think it means we're in a lot of trouble. Right. Now, honestly, I think, if the worst case scenario really were true, I think it would really test kind of the resolve of the system. Yeah. And just, okay, I mean, if you're an attorney general, right? So that's supposedly supposed to be independent of the presidency. Okay, well, what do you do now, right? The ball is now in your court, and you've got to decide whether or not to, press charges or whatever. I mean, if it even rises to something criminal. What I envision is something a lot less drastic, but probably, the best, not the best case scenario, but I guess the best of the worst case scenario is, in my mind, that the past 4 administrations have all known, about ties. Maybe they themselves haven't been involved with any of the dealings. Maybe they've only run on the perimeter of some of these circles, but they've known this whole time. If documents were released along those lines and it became very obvious that was the case, I think that would just be a crisis of public trust in our institutions, and even worse, crisis of trust, because I think we've already gotten to that point. Right. But I think that would just be such a disappointment to a lot of the American people, and just to, I guess, I think you'd have like a segment of the population that jumps and says, "Ha, I told you so," right? Yes. And then you'd have a portion of the population, I think, that really do believe that despite its flaws, despite its failings, despite its shortcomings, the government does, by and large, try to at least service the people, right? I think you'd have a swath of those people that'd be very hurt by something like that. And so What would the political fallout be? I think maybe you start to see more candidates like, I don't know, Anna Paluna Luna, right, who has made a portion of her platform, a part of her time in Congress to be, hey, let's make government transparency, right, issue 2 or 3 instead of 4 or 5 or whatever. I think you'd probably see more of those candidates and see more of a demand from voters to increase levels of government transparency. I think you'd also see maybe more skepticism towards some of the other, other areas that we've been told the government is being as forthcoming as it can be, especially when it comes to things like UAPs, right? I mean, I think the UAP thing is actually more well documented than the Epstein thing, because really on Epstein, all we have is Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction and we have a couple of travel logs. Well, with the UAP stuff, we have got like military footage of things flying around. Like, what's up with that, right? And so I think you'd have a portion of the population that says, like, okay, if you're keeping secrets on something that's disturbing, but we at least have a contextual understanding for what this is. What are you doing on all these other things that we have absolutely no clue, how these things even work or where they come from? And so I think it would just really open a Pandora's box of speculation and distrust towards the government. And I think just to go back to the top there, I think there is a range to the worst case scenarios, right? I mean, I think the worst case scenarios, you're right. All 4 administrations were direct associates of Epstein.
Right.
He was paying them to keep quiet or whatever, right? And I think the best worst case scenario is all 4 administrations have had some semblance of knowledge on what's going on and just haven't been forthcoming. I think obviously the level of severity between those two is wide. But I think any point along those lines, it would be very disheartening to the American people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be. I think that the trust in institutions, obviously, like you said, are an all-time low. There's all these. You look at Ivy Leagues, you look at the education system, you look at media. MSNBC is now MS Now or something like that because they broke off from the NBC, and so they've created nobody trusts any of the legacy institutions in the country, and for valid good reason, because they've lied about a bunch of stuff for a long time. And then you get to the point where something comes out where, oh yeah, the last several administrations knew about a massive sex trafficking scandal in which a bunch of the elites in the country were involved, and they just try to cover it up. I can't imagine anything other than just complete and total chaos, basically, because the political order then doesn't exist because there's no law, there's no order. It's just basically it's a Marxist power game. Whoever is at the top has the authority to hide the sins that they're committing, and that seems like a dangerous thing. So like Michael Knowles, you probably know Michael Knowles, right?
Yeah.
Guy on Daily Wire. He's always saying, and it bothers me, but I think he's right, that we're probably just never going to know. This is going to be one of these things that they're just probably never going to tell you, no matter how bad you want to know. And no matter what they pass in Congress, they're just going to never let you know because of the implications of it. And I tend to take that position, though it sucks because I really would like to know. But on the other hand, I'm like, because we're a global empire, because if there's a fallout in the United States political order, I mean, the rest of the world is going to, who knows what would happen in that case. But yeah, I don't know. I just take like this very, it's like depressing, but like, I don't know exactly how anybody could submit to a government in which the elites in the government can do whatever they want and hide it for decades on end. And everybody else is like, I'm getting speeding tickets. Like, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. And so, I don't know. That's just my take. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
yeah, I mean, one of the thing that's unique to the Epstein thing that I think is different from just about any other area of government skepticism is that there is so clearly a moral imperative on one side, right? Yeah. Because whether or not you believe that aliens exist, whether or not you believe the CIA killed Kennedy,
right,
whether or not you believe the FBI, followed Martin Luther King Jr. around documented his whole life. Right. Regardless of what you think of some of those other things, I think there is a case to be made on both sides about, well, it's important the government keep these secrets, right? Or it's important the government keep that secret because of, it might reveal the way that we operationally do things. And that's been the argument behind like the Kennedy assassination stuff, for instance, for as long as I can remember.
Right.
The Epstein thing is different, though, because it's not about some sort of, government process. It's not about how the nation is protected against its enemies. It's not about, potentially life-changing technology in the way that we travel. It's about one guy who went around molesting and abusing and potentially kidnapping underage girls.
Right.
Like, where is the justice in that? And so, unlike so many of these other areas of government skepticism, Epstein, I think, stands alone as an issue where the vast majority of Americans, regardless of political position, regardless of policy position, look at it and unanimously can say, this is wrong and the government ought to use its power in order to expose, to convict, and to prosecute people like that. Why don't we have answers for what are the most egregious instances of where this actually occurred?
Right. I mean, I live in Madison, Wisconsin. Everybody here is a major progressive liberal. I'm the only conservative in the entire city. Well, just me and my family. And I have a coworker, and he's like a major progressive. We disagree on everything except for Epstein. We both agree on Epstein. So it is like literally the one, and we're the opposite ends of the spectrum. It is like the one thing, or generally speaking, I can kind of get everybody on board. If I'm with a bunch of liberals and progressives and you mention Epstein, everybody's like, yeah, dude, there's something really weird about that. So I think you're right. People are totally on board with it. And there's this deeply moral question at the core of it. And on top of it, right, if it's connected to our government for the last 25, 30 years, it's connected to Britain's government, it's connected to world governments. That's a little, I don't know. That's just terrifying. There's just a scary, there's a scary outcome to that. So no, I totally see what you're saying. Real quick, you mentioned the flight logs, and I've heard a bunch about the flight logs. I don't even really know. See, this was like a couple of years back when people would be like every couple months, new documents have been leaked, or the flight log. What is that? What are these flight logs?
I think it's an unofficial list was in the possession of the Epstein camp. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's literally just a list of flights that went in and went out. And I don't think it's comprehensive. I don't think it's something that the government put out, but I think it's just kind of like a documented list of here are some people that we know traveled to the island based on this document. And so I think people have weighted it differently, right? You have some people online that say that is conclusive evidence that X, Y, and Z people should be prosecuted. I don't know how much stock to put in them. I just know that they exist and that there is debate about their authenticity and veracity and again, their comprehensiveness. But yeah, I think that's kind of what they are in a nutshell, is this kind of this anecdotal list that was kept, I think, from the Epstein camp about, travel logs. And, it should be noted that travel can happen for a ton of different reasons. So you run into problems when you look at a list like that and say, this is because some people refer to that as the Epstein list, right?
Yeah.
That's not. I don't think it can be taken as a substitute as like a client list.
Yes.
But I mean, obviously, would really not like to be on that list, right? So, so yeah, take it for what it's worth.
Right. Well, I mean, you're reporting on a lot of different stuff, but I mean, over the past, I think our generation maybe feels a little bit more, I don't want to say okay with the fact that everything seems to be we don't trust the institutions. It feels like everything's a little bit unstable. It's felt like that for a couple of, I guess since COVID, it's felt like things have been a little bit unstable in the country. And the younger generations have seemed to, we're not dealing with it great, but at least like we aren't just blindly accepting whatever narrative we're seeing on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, which is like, when I talk to older people and I'll mention certain things, so, that never happened, or that's never going to happen. Or like, the Epstein thing. Yeah, no, it's not a big deal. They'll just kind of trust what the elites tell them. Younger generations aren't aren't that trusting. So my question is, you're reporting all the time. You're also a Christian. I'm a Christian. There are things like this that you have to report on that are incredibly, even if there's no government involvement at all, what Epstein was doing is horrible and it's evil.
Yeah.
And so I guess there's a couple of questions that I have. One is like, how do you deal with the fact that it's a fact that the institutions in the country are completely falling apart and crumbling? And like, what do you tell Christian? How do Christians maintain hope in that? And also on top of that, like, how do you not get into, because I've got family members, I've got people that I know who the Epstein thing for them is this weird conspiratorial way to make themselves feel like they've figured something out about the world that nobody else, these are like I've figured out, this deep, dark secret, and they just kind of dwell on that all day long, and it doesn't seem healthy to me. So like, how do you not move into that realm of like, I'm going to just be in despair all the time and be totally paranoid? And does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think so. Kind of like a sense of like identity too, right? Or it's like I have this pet. Well, maybe pet's not the right word, but I have this focus, right? And it's a sad focus, but it belongs to me and the community of people who are willing to delve into these dark waters. Like we
right.
If I'm not going to go in there, who is?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
It's
so
like
just
it's like the flat earthers too. I would say it's like the flat earthers. It's like you talk to them. I've talked to them, and it's like,
have you really?
Oh, dude, it's so difficult. Like, and I'm not talking about flat earthers who aren't Christian, who aren't Christians. I got sympathy for them. Whatever. There's a question of how you can know something's true if you're not a Christian. Whatever, we can talk about that. But
sure,
like there are Christians, well, people who claim to be Christians that I know who are all in on the flat Earth thing, and you talk to them, and I'll be like, look, one, I just think they're totally wrong, and there's way too much evidence that can prove that. But on top of that, they'll say things like, "This helps strengthen my faith." Like knowing that the earth is flat is like good for my faith. And it's so weird. Yeah. It's like, I don't think that's true. I don't think it's helping your faith at all. I think that you're crazy. And so that happens with the Epstein thing. That whole group of people, and I think it's on the political right that's in this deep, the Candace Owens of the world, even the Tucker Carlson's, the Hitler was the good guy. Like there's no end to this community, this group of people that take these stories, or just take the lack of trust in the institutions and drive them to the furthest possible conclusion that they can, which makes them go crazy, and then attribute their insanity to their sanctification. It's I don't know. It's crazy. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Just to address kind of optimism in government.
Right.
I think personally, I think being on the Hill has been both a very encouraging and discouraging time. Encouraging, well, I guess let's start with discouraging. Discouraging because I think there are a lot of areas where even the nation's lawmakers don't have answers to very, very good questions. And so you get up there and maybe you ask, right, your average lawmaker who isn't too keyed in to the Epstein stuff. And it seems like they maybe don't care, or maybe they have other priorities, or maybe they have a long laundry list of concerns that includes re-elections. So much so that Epstein, is nowhere near the top of priorities. Yeah. And so you get it, right? I mean, they're very busy people that have a lot on their plate, and that, to care about an issue like this is just to add to a mountain of things. And there's, policy stuff. There's very legitimate concerns that, go through their mind. So I get it. So that's why it's discouraging, because how could something as sensitive and as pressing as something like this fly under the radar to even our lawmakers, right? So how does that happen? Encouraging, I think, because I think really the power of the individual really is amplified through something like this. I think you can split the Epstein thing into kind of two camps: people that love the conspiracy side of things, and people who are just vested and really interested in their small corner of the world and protecting that. And I think that's encouraging to see people who maybe aren't super off the deep end on conspiracy theories, but are like, I kind of have to know at least a little bit about this if I want to be someone that stewards, my vote at the very least, at the very minimum. So I should be keyed in. And so I think on this particular issue, it's been discouraging because I think even some of the top, the most powerful people in this country, maybe are less interested than I would have hoped or expected them to be. And then encouraging because I see kind of the power of even just everyday people, whether that's around the Thanksgiving dinner table or whether that's, people on their commute who want to key into this and who are interested in the function of their government, who say, no, this is something too important for me to just let slip by. And so as a Christian, I think it kind of reaffirms my belief that, our confidence is not in systems, it's not in parties, it's not in whoever's in office right now. Our confidence long term is in the Lord and kind of the plan that He has for the country, but even kind of on a more micro level, that He has always chosen to work through individuals. And so, while there are questions about whether or not I think we can trust everything the government always does, I think that there is a degree of thankfulness in my heart that we live in a democracy where we get to have a tiny bit of a say in how our government works.
Right.
And whether we're talking about policy or this Epstein thing, I get excited when I see people who care, get involved and interact with the issue. So that's how this particular issue has played on me in my sense of optimism, a little bit of kind of a cop out and saying both there. Yeah. As far as the identity stuff goes, that's a tricky one because, you get some people that really do love to say, it's almost kind of like a reverse identity politics, because the left has their identity politics with things like, if you happen to be of a certain demographic, then you're going to generally behave a certain way. Right. I think that this is kind of almost the flip to that, which is I'm going to behave a certain way because that demographic is, I have a conviction about the demographic that's not going anywhere, which is in this case that the government is not trustworthy. Therefore, I'm going to interact with them in that way. That's kind of like we've resolved that question. Their identity is set in stone. They can't be trusted. And that's not necessarily an identity so much as kind of a belief about an entity. But I think it's kind of there's a similar resonance there where it's like, I've already concluded, I've already made up my mind about this swath of our culture. And that's a tricky one because, in a sense, I get it, right? If you're pessimistic and you've been frustrated with the government for years and years and years, and then this is just the cherry on top that you get, I get it. Right. But I think that, I don't know that there's necessarily that I can, pull out the Bible right now and make a biblical argument that we should evaluate every instance, every story, every day, instance by instance. But I would say that I think that's kind of what we have to do is I think evaluate, evaluate instances and stories and trends separately. I don't think that you can make an extrapolation because the government has totally botched this, that they must be botched on everything. Yeah. I think there are instances where the government has done phenomenal work with transparency. And, that varies depending on what the priorities of any given administration are. But I would just say, look, there are other areas that are causes for optimism, even if right here. I mean, just look at the Maha movement, for instance. Whether or not you believe that thimerosal is bad for you, or whether or not, in vaccines is bad for you, or whether, you agree with everything that RFK Jr. has to say, this is an instance where the government is at least asking the question that I think a lot of Americans have. And so I think that if you're deeply skeptical of the government, there is a temptation to extrapolate frustrations in one area to all areas of government. I don't know that I can necessarily do that or encourage that. But I definitely see the temptation, right? You get it. It's frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the reasons why the founding fathers set up three branches of the federal government. I mean, because there's an accountability structure inherent to that. And one could be corrupted. Hopefully the other two aren't. And so you got this sort of this thing at play where they can hold each other accountable. I think one of the other things that's difficult for the modern person is, like you're saying, just being able to think about different things and make distinctions and recognize the intricate differentiations within particular issues. And, one of the things about conspiracy, which I don't want to bash conspiracy theories, because I think that there's actually validity to, I think some of these conspiracy theories are true that people are talking about. And so I think that there's validity to that. But one of the issues I've seen with this group of people, especially on the political right, because I think it's very popular on the political right, and it's oftentimes by people who claim to be Christians, which is very frustrating because, and I'm talking about the people who are saying like Hitler was the good guy in World War II, like that whole subset of people, that just pisses me off. But the thing that they're doing, I think, and you can tell me what you think about this, is basically it's a neglect. It's almost like they're like children figuring out for the first time the doctrine of depravity, that human beings are evil and do bad things, because we've lived in such a luxurious world for so long in the United States. We kind of, since the 80s, 90s, even, the 70s were rough, but generally speaking, people had decent jobs, they had money, they had nice cars, they had nice homes, and things were generally normal. And then because we became complacent, and because everybody is like presuppositionally a progressive and a liberal, and because people are sinners, we started moving in a different direction. And then it's like 2020 comes around and it just, everything explodes. You got the COVID thing, you've got the vaccines, you've got, then transgenderism just becomes massive. And then all these different things just kind of explode onto the scene. And then this huge group of people on the political right who claim to be Christians, who should have known the biblical fact that that human beings are sinners that deserve to go to hell, like, are figuring this out for the first time. And then they're like, oh my goodness, everybody's a sinner. Like, oh, what are we going to do? And it seems very, very naive and very, very immature. Like, we have an incredibly immature society built up by an incredibly immature church who just refused to preach hell and sin and death for like 60 years because it would make people feel bad, and then they don't want to come to our church anymore, and that would be bad, apparently. And now the evils of human nature are making themselves manifest, and people are flipping out, being like, but again, they don't look in the mirror and they don't say to themselves, hey, I'm a part of this problem. They just keep pushing the conspiratorial thing further and further and further and further and further until they get to this realm of like, everybody else but me is evil. Or in some cases, the Jews are evil because the Jews are the remnant, the ethnic remnant, not the moral remnant or spiritual remnant of Christ. And so it looks like Christ. So in our human nature, subconsciously, we want to eliminate that. And that's just what I'm seeing happening. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
That's fascinating.
I don't know. What do you think? Yeah.
So you're saying like they start with this rosy kind of view of government. Once they realize that's fractured, the rot just keeps going.
So like think about, I mean, this is, I think you can see it on a smaller level. Like when parents get divorced and the kids are young, and those kids kind of grow up with this fractured view of authority. And when it first happens, their whole world shakes. Like, the parents are divorced. You're like, holy crap, the authoritative structure that I thought was just inherently good and would never break is broken. And so those kids oftentimes struggle with authority for the rest of their life. They kind of push back against teachers and coaches or whoever it is for the rest of their life because that structure was broken at a young age. I mean, there's this book, I actually have it right here because I'm doing a whole thing on it. It's called In the Midst of the Years by Thomas Nettles. It's the history of Reformation and revival in America. And he basically just analyzes Reformation and revival and basically just says, look, the ones that had fruit through generations were the ones that preached sin, hell, and hell. They were like, here's a presupposition. You deserve to go to hell. You're a sinner. And then those revivals and reformations throughout American history are the ones who had like lasting impact on multiple generations. The ones that were like, Jesus loves you, and come to church and sing a song that's about yourself, but where we mention Jesus, those ones did not last very long. Sometimes in only a couple of years, there were like fruits. So all that to say, yeah, I think it's basically we're living in a time that's incredibly spiritually immature. The church is incredibly spiritually immature. And because of that, all of these Christians after 2020 are basically figuring out what I think kids should probably learn when they're like 5 or 6. Like their parents should teach them that intellectually, human depravity, that sort of thing. And so we've got a bunch of like 7-year-old, spiritually 7-year-olds in the church. And I think that's the recipe for disaster and I'll shut up after this, because I agree with Bonhoeffer, who said that the church is the conscience of the state. So if the church is weak and has no moral framework for thinking and doesn't understand that very clear doctrine of depravity, they're not going to be able to hold the state accountable. And they didn't in Germany. And they took down the crosses and they put up swastikas. They changed the Bible. They rewrote it because the church had no moral direction of its own, because it was sort of lulled to sleep over the decades prior to that. And that's a very long way of me just saying, I think that some of these issues, even related to Epstein and stuff, really the shock that people are having on the political right is due to the fact that there's been this false fake Christianity that's been brewing underneath the surface of like, feel good, go to your big mega church, sing a couple songs about yourself that you pretend are like Jesus, about Jesus, and then go home and do whatever you want the rest of the week. I don't know. Maybe I'm just way too skeptical. I live in a very progressive place, so the churches here in Madison aren't great. But is any of that resonating, or am I just like a Debbie Downer?
No, I mean, I think you're right in the sense that you have a lot of Christians who unfortunately have, I think, given up on the idea of being active participants in the political sphere.
Yes.
Part of that could be because of this conspiratorial sort of tendency. Maybe you have people that only engage with the public sphere via sort of conspiratorial lens. But either way, yeah, I think that as a Christian, if you're doctrinally standing on the rock, right, and you understand that, well, I think the Bible describes government as, I think, like under the authority of Satan or something like that. Like, I don't think that if you're a Christian, I'll look up the passage in a second, but
sure.
If you're a Christian and you understand, like you said, the fallen nature of man, I think you're disappointed, right? I think you look at government where it has failed and you say, that's really unfortunate, right? The idea that we've implemented just look at the 1960s prior to some of the civil rights legislation we passed. I mean, just gross misuse of power, both at the federal level, at the state level, in some of the most disgusting ways possible. And that wasn't a conspiracy. That was out in the open, right?
Yeah, right.
We all saw it. The country saw it. And I think the Christian looks at that, and I think our reaction is, we live in a fallen world that is prone to serve something other than the good that the Lord has laid out for us, right? We as human beings, we are fundamentally broken. When you feed that tendency with just a little bit of power, right, what you inevitably get is some people that will attempt to abuse it in some pretty heinous ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've always seen that. I think the United States, perhaps, that the idea that even the United States is subject to that kind of disappointment and that kind of corruption is also uniquely frustrating, because the United States was kind of supposed to be different in the terms of, like, at the time when it was founded, right? There was this idea that we could make ambition to compete against ambition, right? You got Hamilton saying that in the Federalist Papers. You got this system of government that was specifically designed to counter human nature.
Yeah.
200 years later, we find, 200 years later, I mean, very quickly thereafter, we find out that's not at all the case, right? I mean, like, even the most, even the most forward-thinking, the most critically evaluating system of government created at the time had serious flaws, where the sin of slavery and so many other terrible, terrible things were allowed to exist. I mean, that has to be disappointing even now for someone that really does think of the United States as being separate, as being distinct, as being unique, as being um,
Well, supposed to be different. I mean, that the fascinating thing about what you're saying is that it's actually, and I don't want to trash the American system because I think that the founding fathers, what did Franklin say? It's a democratic republic or something. If you can keep it,
if you can
essentially,
keep it
yeah.
right.
If you can keep it, like this is up to you. You got to be moral. Adam said, democratic republic is made for morally religious and virtuous people, and so they were all like, you gotta basically. I mean, people talk about Christian national, and we should talk about it, but it's not Christian nationalism. It's most of the founding fathers were actual Christians, and there's been a lie that's been pushed in the evangelical church that they were just merely deists, but only a couple of them were deists. A lot of them were genuine Christians, and they did believe that this thing is only going to work under a proper philosophical presupposition. The social imaginary in the country had to be generally Christian, or this is just going to basically fall apart. The thing that you're saying that's absolutely true is like you even look at what we're doing today with abortion. 3,000 killing 3,000 babies a day. You'd think like this system that was set up to be so great is actually when it gets inverted and it turns into something that it isn't supposed to be, with the false presuppositions of, I'm using the philosophical term of liberalism, not Democrats. 'Cause I think the Republicans and Democrats today are both liberals, as to what degree they're liberals. When you flip that, and now the presupposition of the entire country is liberalism, you get the most horrific crimes ever committed by any country in the human history. I mean, the amount of babies we've murdered in America is not even. We outdo every other country in human history 1,000x. I don't even know how much. I mean, we've killed so many babies just because it's easy to. And so I think to what you're saying, I think it's absolutely correct what you're saying. Now it gets into questions of of like what do you do with that in the church, because you have these people, and I don't know where you stand with this, but you've got the people at Christianity Today, the Russell Moores of the world. I can't stand the guy. I think he's messed up, who they harp on all this. We're supposed to be, what is it, in the world but not of the world, all this stuff, and I think it's just terrible eisegesis, and there's actually no evidence for that. And they say, well, you can't have a Christian nation because Christians aren't supposed to be trying to infiltrate the government and things like that, and they use very aggressive language like infiltrate, as if me voting on the basis of my Christian presuppositions is my infiltrating the government. And they discourage. So there's like these two groups. Like there's this conspiracy theory people who look away from the government because they don't trust them. Like you were just saying, they just don't trust it. They don't want to think about it. But then you have the left wing liberal side of the church who looks away from the issues of the government because they're passive and they don't want to deal with it. And so one of them is like despair. The other one is passivity. And there's no clear vision forward for the Christian church as it relates to politics and governmental involvement. And yet we're responsible. We're held responsible by the Constitution to vote. So it's our civic duty is to vote. We have to vote as Christians because we're part of this country. And so you have all these people who are foggy and blind on how Christians should vote because half of them think that the government is just totally corrupt and irredeemable, which is totally not Christian because people are redeemable and redemption is at the center of the gospel. This other half is passive and they don't want to deal with the horrible parts of the government, so they just turn a blind eye. And in that sense, I mean, they're being passive to like evil, egregious sins. What do you do about that?
I mean, I think that, again, I think you come at it with a sense of you understand that this is a broken world, that utopia was never going to be made here in the United States, as good as this country has been for Christians or anywhere else for that matter. That regardless of what kind of institutions we put in place, regardless of whoever's in office right now, that it's going to be ugly at points because that's just the nature of being here on this earth. There are corrupt people. They will do corrupt things. And we shouldn't be surprised when those things happen. I think that as Christians, our understanding, our duty is to say, I'm going to trust that the Lord has a plan for us and for him that is bigger than Epstein, right? I think there is a certain reassurance, there is a certain glory that the Lord takes when, even in the midst of our frustrations with our authorities, we say we understand that someday we will know what happened to that speech, not because of anything that the Republican Party or Donald Trump does, but because there is someone who will bring justice, right? And it's not anyone on this earth, but someone who has all authority that's been given to him. And so I think that Christians, we can uniquely take reassurance in that the justice will play out, whether or not that's in this life or in the next. And so I take massive comfort in that. I think that anyone who has been, harmed and who hasn't received due justice from this government, who's been failed, can trust in that promise, because that's an unshakable promise that's not going anywhere. But as far as the responsibility goes, we're also not called to just stand idly by. I always am a little frustrated when, with conversations with people that tend to only have bad things to say, I guess, about the political environment, especially because I think to some degree, criticisms of our own political system in a democracy, at the very least, are in some way a reflection of us, and not totally. Right. Because there are a lot of steps between, your vote and ultimately what actually happens.
Yeah. But
we live in a unique period of history where we get to decide who goes to office. And there are, again, a lot of influencing factors, a lot of dollars out there that are pushing hard one way or the other.
But who's that lady from Colorado? The Republican, she claims to be a Christian, but she just divorced her husband. What's her name?
Boebert.
Boebert. Yeah. She doesn't get into office without there being a bunch of people who can't recognize their own sin in that region. I just wanted to throw that out because there's a group of people, not all of them, but I think you're totally right. People vote for what they want. And if you're going to criticize what we're seeing, in some sense, you got to look at yourself and say, I helped put this person here. So anyways, go ahead. Sorry. Didn't mean to.
Well, I mean, listen, if you're complaining that the sensational and that the partisan is dominating the political atmosphere, you might well be right. But if I took a look at your Facebook feed, would I find Wall Street Journal there? Would I find, what kind of sources are you yourself looking at? And so I think that as Christians, we have to place some of that responsibility on ourselves, at least in the context of our government, and say, I do have a very, very, very small ability to vote, to talk, to think rationally about the things that are going on around me. And that's really tough. Parsing out what you believe to be true against what you don't believe to be true, that is a really hard process. And let me just say, listen, with AI on the way, honestly, I have no clue in that couple of years how we're going to be able to tell, what's actually real, what's false. I think that's going to become a much harder fight. But I think that it's incumbent upon us as voters, and more so as Christians, to say, I've been entrusted with this small, again, my corner of the world. I can't solve the 30,000 foot problems, but I can try to at least inform myself on areas that I care about. Maybe Epstein is not your thing. Maybe it's trade policy. My encouragement to any Christian would be, you want to steward one particular area, go read news on like I said, trade policy, on Epstein, on government spending. Read 15 minutes a day. Over the course of a month, I dare you, if you're not a more capable person as a result of that, I don't know what to tell you. Because I think that Christians really can have a sense of optimism that goes beyond this world, but also a moral imperative to be active in pursuing at least a little bit of what they care about. Now, you can't do everything, right? I mean, there's so much in the news out there. If you try to know it all, you're gonna fry your brain. It's impossible.
I agree. I mean, I think one of the I mean, one of the defining factors of Christianity throughout all of history has just been the uncompromising hope of Christianity. That's sort of one of the core tenets of what the faith actually is. What it means to believe in Christ is to maintain hope in the midst of suffering, or maintain hope in the midst of chaos. And you can look back to the first century church and the Roman government, which was much worse towards Christians than anything that we've ever experienced in the United States. Now, I think any government can get there, but they were a lot worse. People being thrown into the Colosseum to be eaten alive by lions, and being put on crosses and hanged and killed in all these horrible ways. And the it's interesting. The narrative that I've heard my whole life growing up in evangelical church is they were killed because they were Christians. And that's not actually true. Like Francis Schaeffer writes a whole book about this, but they were killed because they were Christians, and because being a Christian means that you won't bow down to the authoritative structures when they're telling you to do things that are out of alignment with what Christ commands. And so because the early Christians would not obey the government as it relates to particular commands that he was making of them, they were killed. So it was because they were Christians, but it was a pagan society. So there were a lot of different religions. So it wasn't necessarily a religious thing. It was we're the final authority, the Roman government is, and if you don't bow down to us, you're going to get killed. And
Right.
yet they were willing to go into that, singing praise songs and counting themselves as being grateful that they're counted as worthy to suffer for Christ. And they also didn't, I don't think these people ignored the issues of their day or anything like that, and they didn't have much say in what happened politically back then. So it is, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about the Epstein thing, is because at some level, if you continue to dwell on something like that, which I feel like I've done in some sense to an unhealthy extent, you can basically become, without knowing it, hopeless and just in despair. And then you can mentally check out, be like, I don't care. Whatever happens, happens. And that isn't Christianity. Christianity, like you said, we trust that Christ will judge at the end of the day. And that's going to be like, we don't have to worry about that, because he's going to come back and he's going to judge people for what they've done. And it's an important, I just think you're right. I think you're right. It's important to just remember that. Now, as for the reading news, like, people don't read at all anymore. So if they would just read anything, that would be great, because most of where the people are getting their information is like TikTok and shorts and stuff like
Twitter,
that. And that is horrible, horrible news. And the literacy rates are horrific. People don't know how to read. They don't know how to read, and then they don't read. So Christians should be reading.
At least the Bibles, right?
At the very least. At the very least. Yeah. Which hopefully. A lot of people aren't doing that either. I will ask this, and then we can wrap it up, because I want to, it's totally out of left field, has nothing to do, well, kind of has to do with what we're talking about, but the UFO stuff, the alien stuff, I have not deeply looked into this, because I've got theological issues with aliens. But what is your take on that?
I have no idea.
Okay.
No, I think that, the Epstein thing is like a rabbit hole. Yes. The whole UAP thing, that's just like a well. I have no idea how far down that goes. I mean, you can, if you want to get lost in something, I don't have the time to go down every single interview that's, every document that's been released on that. But it's weird, man. We're getting a lot of lawmakers who say they've seen footage, they've seen evidence of something that was clearly not made by the technology we have now. And so there's just so much speculation around what these things are. And frankly, I'm tracking the spending legislation for next year. Right. Yeah, that's kind of what's on my plate right now. Right. But I kind of anticipate it to be, if not the next thing down the line from Epstein, I expect it to be somewhere as far as the public's interest goes, if only because of some of the promises that Republicans have made along those lines as well. And so I suspect we'll be talking more about that as just a society
Mm-hmm.
later on. As to what they are, I have no idea, man.
Yeah, and it's just, you're right about AI. It's going to get out of control because, okay, so AI is like the videos I've seen. The AI videos are becoming incredible, like so real. It's weird, and so, and then most of the like UFO videos I've seen are like shot on like, you know, a Nokia, like a 1996 Nokia or like a toaster, and that always pisses me off because I'm like, look, dude, I've got this here. It's 4K. Like I can shoot 4K on my phone, and no one, apparently everyone who's seeing UFOs has like a BlackBerry from 2008. I just don't buy it. I do think there might be a spiritual realm to it, but then you add on top of that, the AI is able to create this stuff, and there's going to be all these different narratives and all of these different like quote unquote truths. This is where I get into the realm of eschatology, where I'm just like, look, the Bible is very clear. In the end, people are going to have a very difficult time figuring out what's true and what's not true. And I think it's already like that in some sense with social media, with all the different narratives being pushed on social media. You can talk to somebody who watches Fox News and somebody who watches MSNBC and somebody who watches Daily Wire, and you're going to get three entirely different worldviews and understandings of what's actually happening in the world right now. And that's horrifying. And I don't know how you fix that. I don't think you can fix it. I think this is just how it is because of the internet. And I don't know what you do about that. At World, do you guys talk about that at where you work? Is that something you guys think about?
Oh yeah, no, I mean all the time. I think in news, it's difficult, right? Because there are publications that come out and explicitly try to service one camp or the other. I think some of the names you listed clearly do that. I mean, if it's MSNBC on the left, or I don't know, Daily Wire on the right, there are publications that very clearly have that they're trying to get you to think in a particular way.
Right.
And I'd say that there are an equal number of publications that hopefully are trying to do the exact opposite, which is empower you to make your own decision about what you think. And that's exactly the mission that World gets behind. I would say that that's the mission that the Wall Street Journal gets behind. There are tons of good, trustworthy publications that try to do that on a daily basis. I have kind of frustrations with the conservative camp where it's, you generalize the media is not trustworthy. Well, I don't think it's a very conservative position to have, to say, the chief instrument for how we go out and we get information about what's happening in real time, if we can't trust that, I think that really does limit our autonomy and self-preservation. I just don't think it's a conservative position to say we should do away with them altogether. I really don't. But at World, that's exactly, we try to say, hey, we might have, now there are very explicit things that the Bible says are wrong, right? If it's an issue like abortion, the Bible is a very clear position on what's right and wrong. So we're going to call that in the way that the Bible sees it. But when it comes to whether or not the next spending bill adds to the deficit, right? I'm going to present you the what the Republicans are saying, what Democrats are saying, and hopefully I'm going to get an expert in there too. You'll have the ability as a reader to decide and make up on your mind on your own what the best argument is. I think those are the kinds of news sources that as a reader I'm looking for, that I hope other readers are looking for. But we find that there is a very large swath of the population that's not interested in trying to discern what they believe. They already know what they believe, and they're not going to be swayed from that position. I think that's unfortunate. And so,
yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like, what is reporting? Like, what is that? Like, what are we doing? Because there's obviously an infinite amount of facts that you can report on, even in one or two particular stories. Sure. And so people have to make decisions. Reporters have to make decisions on what's the necessary facts to make to write an informed article or piece on. So I get that. I'm not of the camp. So my position is, generally speaking, there's an order to nature. There's an order to the world. And just because there are a multitude of different perceptions around a particular issue doesn't mean that there are, obviously I'm not a postmodernist. I don't think there's a multitude of different truths. So I think that you can put together a picture of what the truth is by presenting the facts. But like you mentioned, the deficit, like I get that it has been a Christian thing to say for a long time. There are moral issues, and there are issues in the Bible that are totally abortion. We're not going to equivocate on that. But I think debt it's very clear in the Bible, like you shouldn't go into debt. That's wrong. And so I think there's a lot more clarity on the basis of what Scripture says than what a lot of, and I'm not calling world out or anything like that, but just in general, I actually think people need a lot more guidance to figure out what actually is true, which is why because I think there's an order to the world, and because I think that there are people whose callings, particularly like pastors, are this way, and I do think reporters, there's a calling to bringing together the facts and bringing the pieces together, and then showing the people the facts and the pieces, doing it in good faith and for the right reasons, and then guiding them into the particular order that God has created here, today, and now. Now, it's very difficult to do that in reporting, but I think guys like Spurgeon did that. I think guys like Bonhoeffer did that in certain ways. I mean, Spurgeon was just totally unequivocating on slavery.
Right.
And
right.
So, I think just giving the facts, I don't know if that goes far enough. My desire is give me the facts, and then tell me what's the right decision here, because it's not the right decision to spend an ungodly amount of money just so that you can, the big beautiful bill, did the ends justify the means? I don't think so, because we only got rid of Planned Parenthood funding for a year at the end of the day there, and we increased the deficit by $10 trillion is it $10 trillion over 10 years or something like maybe $3 trillion over 10 years or something like that.
Well, that's a perfect example, because I think that in some cases, you're right. As a reporter, you have to say collectively, this is what I think. Mm-hmm. And there's the case against this position is weak to none. But I think there is the vast majority of cases, especially with even on something like the deficit, right? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of conflicting opinions about whether or not the deficit addition actually even exists. And so there's supply side economists rather, sure, who say, right, this is a supply side bet, it's going to pay for itself. Right. Good bill. Yeah. There are other people that look at the same mm-hmm. argument and say that's ridiculous, because you can't assume a 2% growth over 10 years. Mm-hmm. What do you know that we're not going to go into recession? Right. So what happens if you don't meet your numbers? Now you just added all this debt to the country. Mm-hmm. Right. So who's right in there? I think that there is a very strong argument both ways. And at the end of the day, as a reporter, I know the position that I have, and I'll keep that private. But
I don't think it's very difficult. You the idea that you could predict the market for even 3 days is the market right. is volatile. The market is made up of 8 billion people. The global market, the American market, is made up of 300 right. million people. That we can't predict. We have no clue. We can't predict the weather half the time. We can't predict the weather tomorrow. So the predictive analysis is interesting, and I think it's important for personal investment on a personal level. And right. I think that when you make those personal investments, you're making those knowing that you're investing your own personal money, and it's a risk, and you could lose money. Now, you get into an issue when you start to invest everybody's money into a volatile market, which every market is somewhat volatile because they all move at the whims of human interest. And human interest is very strange and very weird, and we can never fully right. predict what the market is going to look like, even in a couple of weeks.
God bless Jerome Powell.
What's that?
God bless the Fed. No, basically, that's their job, is to try to predict what's going to happen. But it's impossible.
But everybody's trying to play God in that right. situation. And so my answer would still be on an economic level, from a Christian perspective, I'd be no, you cannot understand what the market is going to. You might get lucky, the saying, even a blind dog sniffs a butt once in a while. You might get lucky here and there, be able to predict the market, and that's fine. But we're talking about human interests, because economics being boiled down to mathematic equations and formulas, I think, is the most rationalistic garbage I've ever heard in my life. I'm just going on a tangent here, but human interest and human decision-making can't be entirely rationalized. Yeah, because they don't, right. because we're weird, because we're made we got all these different facets to us, and people are interested in
and that's
different things at
just
different times.
in our country too. You got to take it global.
Exactly. And so like I don't know. I guess I'd say
I mean, that's a perfect, I mean, like what you're saying, it absolutely makes sense. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I think I would probably agree with that.
Sure.
The thing that I can't do as a reporter though, is pretend that this other argument doesn't exist.
Well, you can just say it's wrong.
I could do that, but I think that at the end of the day, I have a strong suspicion about which one I know to be probably true. Right. But at the end of the day, when half the lawmakers in Congress have one view and half the lawmakers in Congress have another, I'm going to say, as a reporter, I'm not an expert on this. So what I'm going to tell you as the reader is that there are two very passionate camps, and two camps that members are drawing from in order to make decisions that are going to shape the direction of the country. You want to know the best arguments for both of them. And this is what the outcome that ultimately came as a result of those competing camps.
Yeah.
That's what I think being a reporter is. It's tough because you got to make that judgment call, right? Because sometimes you're absolutely right. Right. With some things you're like, no. They're like, the earth is round, guys.
Right. We've got two camps here. One of them's wrong. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I think there is, a large sense of skepticism that I have to approach, and that I have to approach even my own convictions with. Because in the end of the day, I hope that I can present a good faith effort to my readers to let them know I'm not trying to decide this question for you. I don't want to come down on, I don't want to go inside your brain and say, this is what's right. All I'm here to do is to empower you to make that decision on your own. And there are some areas where, again, if the Bible has a very clear standing on something, I'm going to say this is what the Bible says, right? But ultimately, I'm appealing to an authority that's way beyond me. Yeah. When it comes to something as complicated and as nuanced and as difficult as a lot of the issues are that Congress tends to grapple with, I think that I have to have the personal humility to say, I know what I believe is true here. If you're approaching this as a reader that has the opposite view, you're going to be able to smell that from a mile away, right? And I'm not going to service you, because if you want people that'll give you the position you already have, there are plenty of outlets already doing that. I'm here to do something different, and then that's it's just a tough grind, man. It is an everyday question.
What is the role of precept? I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, you guys are clear about your Christian leaning. We're Christian. We believe the Bible is authoritative. What is the responsibility of the Christian? Because this is where I get into, this is what I'm trying to think of through this, because so your presuppositions drive your decisions, they drive what you think. And so no matter how hard we try to look at things from different directions and different perspectives, it's really your presupposition that drives it. Now, the question is like, okay, is your presupposition correct? The correct answer for the Christian is yes. And I'll die on that hill. My presupposition of the Bible being authoritative and Christianity being real and Christ resurrecting from the dead, that is correct. And so, is a liberal presupposition correct? No, it's fundamentally wrong. It's fundamentally flawed. It's got a false understanding of human nature and anthropology and all that. And that's wrong. And so, though the liberals and though the rest of the world would look at me as a Christian and say, well, you can't report on the basis of your presupposition as a Christian because you're pushing your ideology on us and you're telling me that your ideology is right and mine isn't right. Like, I would just say I don't really care because I am right. In the same way that when I do evangelism and somebody comes up to me and they say, well, why can't everybody be right? Why isn't all gods kind of an amalgamation of the same God and everybody is happy and we all go to heaven? And I'd be like, because that's wrong and because you're going to go to hell if you don't believe in Christ.
Consistent.
Well, it's not logically consistent, but it's certainly not logically consistent. But it's also just like on the basis of my presupposition and what I believe the world is and what it means, it's just fundamentally flawed. And why can't that get into the realm of reporting? Like, I feel like I would love somebody to just be like, go, like, okay, here's the facts. Here's the two sides. You've got big spenders over here who say, maybe the market will keep up with it, and then it's just an investment. We'll make a bunch of money. You've got the people who no, we shouldn't do that. We need to not spend so much because we don't know what the market's going to do. And then you say, I'm a Christian. Debt is bad. Here's 10 proverbs on this.
Yeah.
And this is it's bad. And also pride is bad. And believing that you can predict the markets is rooted in pride and arrogance. I think that's pretty clear.
You can make a very compelling argument for that. Yeah.
And so this side is more right and this side is wrong. And the reason I'm pushing back is because I think Christians have been so skeptical to just come out and be like, no, that is idiotic. That makes no sense. I'm not doing that. Which again, I have a personality that's very straightforward with that. But even just reporting to be like, that doesn't make any sense. What do you mean you can predict the market for 10 years? Are you out of your freaking mind? No one's ever been able to predict the market for 10 years. Why would you ever think that? I would love it if I read that. And if someone reported that, I was like, this makes no sense. I'm sorry to push back. I'm not just trying
No. I think it's a very valid question. I think internally, I'll give you kind of the metric that we use at World.
Sure.
We say that the Bible does not speak on the same level of clarity about all things, even though it does address all things. So on things like, I don't know, let's say FMAP and Medicaid, right? Yeah. How much does the federal government need to contribute to individual states in order to fund their Medicaid programs? The Bible says exactly nothing about that, right? Yeah. Which is in contrast to things like abortion, which is very clear that every individual life has meaning and value. And so where wisdom applies to both, the Bible is explicit about only one. And so you use a sense of, we use tiers essentially.
Certainly.
Where the Bible's wisdom and application comes down from very general to very specific. And so again, on something like abortion, we might say, very clearly,
yes,
this is wrong. We're on a sense of stewardship, which is, again, a very important principle and a biblical principle. I think you have competing elements there where you have a responsibility of the state to care after the widow, the orphan, the sojourner, but you also have the responsibility of being not fiscally crazy, right? And so,
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all, because you do have the biblical principle. If a man does not work, a man does not eat. And so the presuppositions that would get you, the biblical theological presuppositions that would get you to the place in which you say, there's two things in which you say that the state is not responsible for providing Medicare for all people, would come from the Bible, and you can't take it into another direction. The other thing too is the state is not fundamentally biblically responsible for taking care of the poor and the sojourner and all that. That's the church's responsibility. And James says
individual responsibility.
And the churches, or as the institutions like local churches, James says you're not a Christian if you don't take care of the poor. Well, over the past 100 years, the American church has basically just given that responsibility to the federal government. I mean, every educational institution, every hospital, every adoption center in the country was started by either Catholics or Protestants and were privately run by the donations of Christians from churches all over the country. And we just gave that over to the federal government because there's a lot of reasons why we did it. But basically, it could be sloth, laziness, whatever. And so I do think, personally, I just think that there are actual answers to these questions on Medicaid. I think it's actually an abdication of responsibility to give that responsibility to the federal government, because it means that you don't have to take care of your sick mother who lives in your backyard and at the house down the street or whatever, because the government should be doing that, when God, in the principle of subsidiarity, has given you that responsibility. And so what most American Christianity has turned into is, how can we get rid of all the responsibility that God has given us and give it to the federal government, and then pretend like we don't worship the federal government, when in all that we do, we worship the federal government, though we say we worship Christ. I That's basically what I think about that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
But I think, and you know what, again, like I think that I would probably, if I were to sit here and to extrapolate all my personal convictions on how government should work, I might very well come to a very similar conclusion.
Sure.
But what I am saying is that I think we can both agree that the Bible, again, if you're committing an abortion, right, the Bible speaks very clearly about that. Yeah. I think it speaks a lot less clear. So if you're going to vote to do that, like that's, that's a very kind of direct sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you're voting to change the amount that FMAP contributes to states from 10% to 8% over 5 years, does the Bible speak to that? I think that, again, in a broad sense, you can make a very compelling argument one way or the other about stewardship. And in your particular case, I would guess that it's very much in the sense that, listen, there is a personal responsibility that falls on the private sector, and specifically the family and the church, to step up where the government can't, right? But I think that's a separate question from the direct moral consideration of, am I, in the current policy setting, right? I have to make a decision as a lawmaker to either support this plan or to not support this plan. What does the Bible say about that? Well, in a large variety, the vast majority of cases, it doesn't. And so I think as a Christian, there are certain things about policy that I can't definitively answer, even though I have personal convictions about what might be right or wrong. I can't say the 10 commandments say thou shalt not kill, boom, that's pretty straightforward. Right. That simple level of clarity and transparency, I think, can't be applied to votes like the thing on Medicaid or I don't know, something like HB1 visas, right? And so there's so many areas that I think well-meaning Christians look at the exact same policy situation and use scripture to come to very, very different conclusions. I fall in one camp. I'm sure they fall in another, but it's not as explicit as I think the Bible at the end of the day is on some other things.
Do you think that there's a right answer though? Like when Jesus comes back and we're like sitting and talking to him, remember Medicaid? And he's like, yeah.
You remember how you,
there was a right answer, because I do, I think there is a right answer, and it gets into questions of the function of the Holy Spirit. Because I hear the point you're making, and it's a point that I've heard my whole life growing up in the evangelical churches. You got well-meaning Christians on both ends of this, and I've come to the conclusion that you don't have well-meaning Christians on both ends of it. You have ideologically liberally controlled Christians on one end of it who operate out of their liberal presupposition, and you have Christians who are reading the scriptures with their authority. Their presupposition is that the scripture is infallible and it's authoritative, who are coming to similar conclusions on a whole bunch of things. And then you have these people over here that are like, yeah, what's actually controlling where my logic is going is liberalism, though I say it's the Bible. And I don't think that you can end up at some of these issues and be a genuine Christian. And on top of that, I don't think it's smart for Christians to say that they're both well-meaning Christians, because that would mean that the Holy Spirit would lead people towards a different type of Christ and function. And that would be a heretical position on what the Holy Spirit's function is, which is to guide us towards Christ. And so if the Holy Spirit is guiding all these different people towards Christ, but they're all ending up on at these totally different, logically contradictory places, there has to be then the next question is, wait, is everybody actually being led by the Holy Spirit? And my answer is obviously not, or we're just a bunch of postmodernists, right? Like, because that would be a problem. And so I get what you're saying in practice, because it's a way of doing things as a Christian that I think is for a long time worked in the United States, because both sides of the aisle on the social issues were not utterly immoral. Like you've got the Democrats now are like, we're going to chop kids up and we're going to kill babies. Okay, that's really bad. The Republicans are like, yeah, we're fine with killing babies. So you've got the immorality. There's a bigger difference between the immorality between the two parties, and so things are a little bit more volatile today. In history, it was like, yeah, like you're saying, do we give money to help the poor out a little bit, or do we let the private sector deal with that? And it felt like on the surface level, those issues were, Christians can hold either of those issues. And I think over time, it's proven that the ones who were more, their gut reaction or their presuppositions led them towards government taking care of the issues that they should be taking care of, have led to now this sort of Christianity Today type of Christianity in which there is no truth. Everything's sort of postmodern, and multiple Christians can come to the opposing conclusions on issues, and we should just all be okay with that and live in that. And I've read I know church history, like that isn't how people operated throughout all church history.
Yeah.
They would have said that was like demonic or something, because it's so contradictory to Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except for me. It's very singular. It's very like binary. And I don't think that that's just in the ways of salvation. I think it's in the ways of sanctification and in Christian living. That I talked for way too long there, but
no. I mean, you make your point perfectly, but I guess let me ask you this. Let's put a theoretical cap on this.
Sure.
If you had a bunch of Christians that each were at their own congregations and they all were tasked to think what to do with, I don't know, the policy of mail-in voting, right?
Okay.
Do you think each congregation would arrive at the same answer eventually?
Yes. If they're truly led by the Spirit.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Well, I don't think here's my question would be, see, there's a multitude of factors. Obviously, you have indwelling sin. So there's going to be an aspect of, but let's just say like the congregations are all between 100 and 500 people. And I think that there would be if they were genuinely Christian churches that were actually filled with people who had the Holy Spirit, they were truly converted. There wasn't a bunch of like fake Christians or non-Christians who were in there. There was like all of them were Christians. I think over a period of time, through prayer, through reading scripture, through conversation, I think that they would end up, the vast majority would end up at the same position on the basis of maturity level too. If you got like somebody who's like 22 and who just became a Christian and they're like coming out of like Marxist ideology, that person's going to have a difficult time figuring it out.
Being contributing to the process. Yeah.
Right. But if you've got people who have been Christians for 25 years, they're genuine, they're all in. I think that that's the function of the Holy Spirit is to bring about unity within the invisible church. And that unity isn't just on things that seem to be explicit in Scripture. I think it's on everything. Like I think God is working his will in everything in society, in every part of our life, every aspect of our life. And I don't think that we can just reduce that to, well, the Bible says we shouldn't kill, so that's the thing that all Christians should agree on. And we can't really go outside of that, or the Bible says we shouldn't steal. So like these are clear. I think we've got to look at the whole picture and we look at all the teachings of Christ. He teaches on the poor. He teaches on the responsibility of the church and on the individual. And if you work, and it covers a lot. It's a big book and it's infinite. And so there's infinite application from each verse. And so I know people think it's crazy, but I think the reason people think it's crazy is because we are saturated in postmodernism. And I think a lot of the conclusions that Christians come to today are more a result of the postmodernism that we were born into rather than a biblical way of thinking, because I think a lot of people throughout church history would have thought differently because they didn't grow up in such a postmodern, this idea that there is no truth, that there's multitude of truths or whatever. So I do think over a period of time, people would come to the same conclusion. Yeah.
Let me ask you this then.
Okay.
Would it be possible then for a community of mature Christians to make the perfect policy society? So assuming you just have Christians and that, they're fallen, but within that structure, do you think it's possible for that community to create a perfect
policy? I mean, I'm not Wesleyan. I don't believe that people can be perfect. And so
Well, not
No.
people, but the policies.
Right. I don't believe that the output of a human being can be perfect, because obviously we have indwelling sin. Still, as Christians, it's the great mystery of you become a Christian, you're justified, but you have indwelling sin. And so I don't think it would be perfect. And I think that the temptation toward authoritarianism and control would become overwhelming. And I think that that's what we're kind of seeing right now. I think we had a lot of well-meaning Christians in the 40s, 50s, and 60s who started a lot of the institutions that are now completely falling apart in the Christian church. I mean, you've got Christianity Today is a prime example of this, not to continue to go after them, but Billy Graham, I go back and forth on. Sometimes he'd made some dumb decisions, but he did a lot of good. And he starts Christianity Today. J.I. Packer, my favorite theologian, was heavily involved for a long time. And there was a long time in which it did a good job at what it said it was going to do. And there were well-meaning Christians. Well, they just let their guard down on particular things and didn't put the right people in positions of authority. And now it's completely fallen apart, and it's totally corrupt, and it's like actually heretical in a lot of ways. And so the proclivity of human nature to destroy things that are supposed to be good, and to not be able to totally get it right, like that, I'm all in on that. I think that that's true. That said, I do think that the capacity to do what is right and good, and the capacity to make good decisions on policy, we have a lot more ability to do that than I think Christians in our modern age give themselves credit for, because of the saturated postmodernism that we've been in. That is corrupting. It makes everybody skeptical of themselves. And we should be to a degree, but not to the degree that Christians are today, in which, I mean, I can't tell you, every church in my city has a pride flag out front. Almost every single church in my city. You can't drive down every church. They're all trans, whatever. And the conservative churches in my city are not supporting pro-life, anti-abortion stuff anymore. They won't give their money to that anymore. They're
conservative churches.
They call themselves conservative. Oh, there's if you ever want something to report on, there's scandals everywhere in Madison, Wisconsin in the church. They're pro-abortion, the conservative churches are there, or they'll just keep their mouth shut about everything. And this is a result of basically, I think, being told for a long time, everything's too complicated, everything's too nuanced, politics are too difficult. Let's put politics over here, theology over here. And that fallacy of compartmentalism has destroyed the Christian ability to think. And to think biblically about everything in their life. And so we've used these cop-outs of church and the separation of church and state. And, what is the Bible verse? Like, we're able to see through a half dimmed something as like this way of not
mirror dimly.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And all of these to basically just be like, let's just be passive and just not deal with the issues at hand, when American history is full of people. The abolitionist movement, slavery, they were very clear. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they went after it, and they abolished slavery. And that's an amazing work of the grace of God in history, through politics, through people who, like Wilberforce in England, who are so fundamentally clear on their political position, even though everybody was telling them, you don't know what you're talking about, you're wrong, this will never happen. So I just think we need to give ourselves a little bit more credit. We're right about the world and how it started and the purpose and what God's doing. And so we should try to implement that more in how we approach politics, because I think we could create a more flourishing society. There are going to be issues. There's going to be bad actors, but I think we can do it. I think people are so bogged down in this, like, we can't do it. I think we really can. It's just my take. And I get sin is a problem, and we got to deal with it, but we can't let that hinder us from going after things and trying to get rid of things. That's why I want I think we can get rid of abortion, and I think it can happen. So that's just my take. And it might be an overly optimistic, stupid, dude, that's stupid.
I don't know. I have nothing against optimism. I don't think despair is Christian at all.
Sure.
But I think that Yeah, I think that. Sorry, my AirPods are dying on me here.
Okay, we can wrap it up here. We can wrap it up here in a little bit.
I can hear you. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. I guess my hesitation with just with taking up everything you just said would be, I don't know that I have the confidence that. I think that on the vast majority of things, I think Christians could definitely come to a consensus on, or at least tell the general direction in which they should walk. But I think as far as, even in the same way that what is the best use of my time today? Like after this, should I go eat a 30-minute lunch or should I eat an hour lunch? Am I being a good steward if I take an hour lunch? Am I being slothful if I take an hour lunch? Maybe is it good stewardship to rest for an hour before I, begin my next step? I think there's so many questions where wisdom and even where I think I do have a degree of liberty to choose within the scope of what I know is right. The Bible lays out as the right direction to say, I have a choice here, and that choice is going to mean different results for my day. And at the end of the day, I have to make the best judgment call I can. I think that, I don't mean to beat the phrase to death because I know it has been, but I think two Christians looking at that situation, depending on their strengths, depending on their weaknesses, depending on the assessment of the situation, can come to different answers. And I think that in a similar position, although it's much higher stakes, Christians can, I think, come before God and say, I need guidance on this thing, right?
Yes.
Whether you're talking about, let's just say, I don't know, maybe there's a 7% tax or an 8% tax. Right, and it might sound silly to point that out.
Yes.
But sometimes, I think that, as a Christian, does the Bible speak authoritatively on the 8% tax versus the 7% tax? I don't think so.
Sure.
And I don't think that if you posited the question to several congregations separately, that they would all come to the same answer. I think, and I don't think that's necessarily the result of sin, but I think there is a separation between, the choices that are very much available to us, and knowing that we can't control every outcome. And I think that or get every outcome completely most efficiently right. I think part of that requires a sense of dependence on, God's sovereignty, that despite our best broken efforts, that his will be done. But I think that you're not wrong in that. I think that a lot of Christians really ought to take confidence in the way that they see the world and not always know, why, the way that the Bible describes things is the best way, but to trust in that regardless, and to say, I think this is the path society should pursue, even if, I can't stand up in this town hall and debate my way out of this one. Then I'm going to put my ultimate trust in the Word of God.
Absolutely.
But I will say, I think that as a journalist, that's not my job right now. And if I ever decide to, I could never see myself going into the ministry, but if in the theoretical world where I do, if that becomes my role, and I think my role has changed, but in my current role as a reporter, I don't think that's my place to say, unless I have the absolute confidence that I can make that call. And so I think, to circle back to the original question, I think that's kind of the position, the posture we try to adopt that world. We do it imperfectly, obviously, and there's so much, I think, I think there is so much room for debate there. I mean, as even yourself, you've displayed that very eloquently. Like maybe there ought to be a more compelling, authoritative stance on some things. But I think it's just kind of like an everyday struggle of how do we approach this as a good steward of the organization and of our our duties as journalists. So it's tough, man.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree at all. I don't disagree that it's tough, and I agree that you will always have degrees of difficulty in figuring out particular issues, and there's going to be disagreement. I would say that the disagreement and the disunity is a result of sin, but regardless, that's just going to exist, and we have to exist within that realm. But I do think that, like what you're saying about, I wish Christians were thinking more like, what's the best use of my time? Should I do this? I actually wish that was how people were thinking. And I just don't think people are thinking like that at all anymore. And people, I mean, if you go read Jonathan Edwards, he had this list of resolutions that he wrote at 17 years old, 100 resolutions that he wanted to complete. I don't remember, maybe before he died or something like that. And they were the most like unbelievably profound things that no 17-year-old today would ever write, and probably back in his day. But
Right.
it was sort of like, I think that Christians should be thinking that way. We should be be very vigilant about what we're doing with our time and how we're thinking through issues and trying to come to the right conclusions. And a lot of Christians, I think, are just checked out. Like, I don't know. It's just too hard. And the pastor's telling me I can't figure it out. And so let's just not do anything. And so I think the approach that you take and that they take at World is a good approach, in that at the very least, people are trying to figure out what's true. And I think a lot of people have even given up on figuring out what's true, which is why it's important to talk about the Epstein case and things like that. And just to get the facts straight, because when you've given up on figuring out what's true, you can just start making a bunch of crap up, and you start to just sort of believe whatever. What's that?
Or become apathetic. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You become nihilistic because there's no truth. Right. Everything's just horrible and terrible. And so I hate to wrap it up, because my wife and I are going up north, and she's like, I need to do the laundry, and I'm in the basement. Okay, cool. But I appreciate you doing this and taking time to talk about this. I think it's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
So, thank you.